case to them before processing the information, these are the probable two solutions which you can look at. However, consent definitely becomes a big challenge in the B2B space.
So how are you managing it? Suppose in a global scenario, this is a common global scenario, right? How is it getting managed in case of GDPR? How
Correct.
do you think it is different in India?
So GDPR, I think the main difference in GDPR and the DPDPA is the lawful basis with the need of an express consent for the purposes of processing. Now you need express consent as a lawful basis for doing any processing of data. That is something which is different than that of GDPR. So that's the reason why it becomes more difficult in the Indian context than in the GDPR context. Because in GDPR, it's kind of an express implicit consent taken for transaction processing in this scenario. However, in the Indian context, when you need to do additional activities and you have to have an express consent, but no avenue for it, then it becomes a challenge.
You mean to say that earlier in our drafts we had deemed consent.
Correct.
That got dropped and the consent become a major instrument for data processing.
That's actually a very important point. So your deemed consent was a concept in the previous versions that could somewhere fit into this narrative. So the same example of a Zomato or Swiggy, you could have a deemed consent for transaction processing and the intermediary could do the processing of the data. However, in the current version of the act that has been published, you actually need express consent for every type of processing. So then it becomes difficult to carry out such transactions for intermediaries.
Thank you, Aniket. Shivani, I will come to you. Would like to know, you're managing security operations for Mahindra Group. Now, when it comes to group, there are intra-company transactions. Sometimes the conglomerates think that data is our power because you have retail, you have automotive, you have finance.
Right.
Right. So how are you dealing with this from B2B perspective? And what are your thoughts on this?
Sure. I think I would start with saying basics don't change for even the B2B companies. We need to follow the data. We need to see what that personal data is being used for. So obviously there will be multiple challenges because the differences are, the business is so different from one another. And obviously personal data being collected at different businesses today within Mahindra can be interchangeably used for marketing purposes, right? So obviously the same challenges what Aniket was also saying about consent management. I think that is the biggest thing when we are looking at how to manage this so that we can better manage the data which we are collecting across the different businesses too. I think apart from consent management, I also think the data privacy rights for an individual, that's going to be a bigger challenge maybe when we start implementing this, and because as the act actually gives a lot of rights to the data principle about right to erasure, right to correction, etc., etc. So when I start looking at implementation, tomorrow if I have to address the volume of tickets coming in from the end customers about corrections or erasure or removal, withdrawal of consent, the volume of data which we are running in the background, the challenge will come in where I have to search the different areas where my data is lying today and what all different purposes are we actually looking at, and obviously managing that particular request coming in from the data principle in time as per the timelines for DPDPA. I think apart from this and third-party vendor management, right? I mean, we are connected to so many clients and partners in the ecosystem where all the data is lying within Mahindra Group or outside Mahindra Group. That's the discovery what we have to make sure that wherever the personal data is lying, we have a control over that. So I think that's one of the things, a bigger picture we are looking at.
So do you see this tussle between business and the privacy officers, on the data sharing and
Absolutely, absolutely. I think those conversations keep happening that, we want to collect this data for so-and-so purpose, and the other business would say, oh, we don't need this, but we do need that additional data to be collected from, this website. So for example, auto.mahindra.com has a form already on it where you can go and register for test drives and all of it. But the other holidays has a different picture altogether, right? They collect family details, how many of you are traveling, are there children traveling with you, etc., etc. So the logistics is completely different again. It's all B2B, where, the deliveries are happening, and it's like a backbone for any e-commerce company. So every business will have a different perspective of collecting the data. So what we're trying to do is, we are looking at automation, obviously, because that's going to make our life simple to manage these things. We would want to have a single platform where we can process, collect data, track it properly, and obviously, some automation tool where we can actually scan the data to identify where all this data is lying and on what purpose have we collected that data for, right? So yeah, it's a long journey, of course. I don't say that it's going to be something which we can achieve overnight. But yes, there is discipline which is required for sure. Another thing I would want to add over here is, I think when we start implementing all of these things, it's going to bring a lot of discipline and culture in all the organizations, whether it is B2B or any other companies for sure. Uh, they have to have the similar capabilities like what we would have. We would have an expectation that they will be able to, cater to our all questions and, audits, etc. Apart from the regulatory audits, I think this is one more audit which will then begin in this, data privacy impact assessments, or DPO would get hired, and then we have these separate audits which will be data privacy specific. So I think it's a long journey, but yes, we are geared up.
So as a group, are you planning, in GDPR they had binding corporate rules. As a group, are you planning some common ground?
Yes, we are looking at intra-company contracts, where how do we manage the legalities between both the companies, basically. I mean, today also we do that, but we have to add specific clauses which are required to be added as per the DPDP Act. That's where we are.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anita, I will come to you. You're representing Standard Chartered Bank. You're headquartered in UK. You have India business operations as well, and you have better familiarity with GDPR, right? Couple of things. In UK, they have various regulations. One of them is about account information system that the banks are paying, and then there is a fintech ecosystem which is like payment initiation services. So there are regulations mandating sharing data so that the customer's experience is better. Now, bank has a lot of information, and fintech ecosystem is booming. How are you dealing with this? Because there are multiple stakeholders, they're doing different operations. Today, every transaction, you never know where the transaction gets initiated, and you have to cater to that transaction. So how are you seeing the banks playing from DPDP perspective, especially B2B scenario? There could be various challenges, with data breach, it's consent notice, obviously. Please go ahead.
First of all, thanks Prasad and DSEI for giving this platform to zoom in on B2B transactions and DPDPA, because it's a very different topic that we have not zoomed in earlier. Maybe in general we have spoken, so thanks to the audience for taking out time. So I'm from a global bank that operates in 60 markets. So the first thing when I look at B2B transactions is, we deal with multiple stakeholders, any bank for that matter, whether it is a local domestic bank or a global bank. There are umpteen number of players in a bank with a, that operates with the banking industry, fund houses, exchanges, correspondent banks, ATM network providers, and payment providers, of course. So there are umpteen number of players, just to name a few, these are the few ones. So, and the first problem for us is to identify what is the role that this player is, what is the relationship that you have with this kind of a stakeholder? Is it a data fiduciary relationship or a data processor relationship? Typically we'll be using data fiduciary and data controller because we are so ingrained with GDPR concepts. So the relationship identification is the key point for us, because if it is data fiduciary, if the two entities are data fiduciaries, the contractual agreements will be, the clauses will be very different. So first is the identification. And if it is a data fiduciary and data processor, for the DPDPA, the accountability is more on the data fiduciary. So, accordingly, the contractual clauses must be written in this relationship. And then if it is, of course, there are, in B2B transactions are also happening with, processors like IT service provider, you'll have a tax provider, or you'll have a fintech software. So there are, other providers, not only in the tech space, non-tech space as well, you will have certain data processors. So there also, again, based on, because you are a data fiduciary, your accountability is far more higher. So obviously you'll ensure that all the reporting that is required and all the participation that is that you want your stakeholder, that is the data processor, to do, you'll mandate through clauses. But when it comes to a data fiduciary to fiduciary relationship, which I think is the core topic of our discussion. So data fiduciary to data fiduciary, what happens is, there are some times where you can exhibit control. There are most of the times, though the clauses are signed, you are actually not able to exhibit control. So that's another challenge that I foresee. Like for example, fund houses, exchanges, there is information, personal data beyond business card data that is shared. But your ability to control the clauses is less. So in this case, this becomes a huge challenge. There is no straight answer for it. So we do a risk prioritization, and there is a risk prioritization that happens for different category of these stakeholders, and based on that, we will check what is the risk appetite that we have to have, and what is that we have to collaboratively work. So as Prasad has already touched and others also have touched, the key points are, data breach is one, because ultimately for any privacy law, we don't want misuse of data, and we don't want data leakages. This is the two core points, and we want to ensure that the individual is given control with respect to data subject rights. So in these three aspects, data protection becomes key, and we have to have due diligence done to the on the data fiduciary side in the possible cases. Then data breach notification, we need to ensure that the accountability is taken in the relationship by the other data fiduciary as well, to give right communication, timely communication to the data principals as well as the regulatory bodies, which is one of the requirements of DPDPA. And there are other aspects like audit and rights with respect to data subject rights. There is also one more factor that plays in. If the entities are two domestic entities, the challenges are different. If there is one local entity, domestic entity, and there is global entity, again, you'll have to play you'll have to ensure that the global entity also, understands DPDPA implementation. So there has to be, you need to ensure if there is adequate data segregation for Indian data. So, and if there are two global entities, again, the complexity is much more, because you'll have to work that much more to segregate Indian aspects and ensure there is a consent mechanism in place. Of course, the list can go on. I would like to give opportunity to the other speakers to give their thoughts on the rest of the aspects.
Thank you, Anita.
Yeah.
Coming to you, Satyanandan, you're representing Tata AIG. Insurance is a very complex domain and multiple stakeholders. It is highly digitized now, right from your policy initiation to claim processing. It has all the elements of digitization. Also, a lot of unbundling of services has happened. There are platform aggregators like Policy Bazaar who play a role. Then you have insurance brokers, agents. So data is everywhere, and there could be a role ambiguity. So how are you looking at implementation from DPDP perspective, and what challenges you are facing, especially from B2B perspective?
Prasad rightly identified, the complexity of the B2B ecosystem, what we have in insurance sector, considering life in general, is quite complex. Insurance business in itself, if you really understand, we are a back-end business. The front-end business, from a sourcing perspective, is done by the agents, the brokers, the corporate agents like banks. When you come to servicing of the business, it is again done by the hospitals, the garages. When you talk about motor insurance or health insurance, you talk about surveyors. So the customer touch point at any point in time are the intermediaries who work with the insurance company. So in the scheme of things, when you talk about the insurance business, which is globally, the design is globally the same way. The DPDP Act with its consent management feature, it becomes quite complex in terms of if insurance company is classified as a significant data fiduciary, then how this B2B relationship evolves. Where does the liability fall? The DPDP Act clearly says that the liability is with the significant data fiduciary for a data breach that happens. But if let's say take an example, if a data is there in the dark web, you do not know where the leak has happened. Because the footprint of the same data is with the agent, it is with the insurance company, and it is also with the service provider. So the liability, where does it fall? First of all, I think from last 2-3 months, I think 4-5 months, I think the insurance industry, we have been, I'm heading the subcommittee of the GI Council for all the insurers. And we have made representation through the IRD as well as the DPDP regarding the fine clauses which we want changes in the overall DPDP rules. And we have also made representation to IRDA from a perspective of what type of relief they can give to the insurers like us. Because the complexity of the business is such, I think what Anita mentioned regarding the clauses, where you have a situation, that both the entities are either are data fiduciaries, either one entity is data producer and one entity is a data fiduciary. The complexity of the language and what complexity of the clauses need to be understood, and there has to be a certain relief from the insurers also. So this is a very, very, very complex ecosystem where we need to evolve, we need to understand, and the more importantly, the right amount of ownership. Who is the owner of his data? And from the liability falls on which entity. So this will evolve over a period of time, and we are awaiting some amount of final clarity, because until and unless the clarity doesn't come from a regulator and even the DPDP, I don't think the greater amount of implementation can be done. Even when you talk about consent management, I think the consent management licensing we are not finding entities, and every entity is developing a consent management solution. We are seeing a lot of tech companies also developing a consent management solution. So this is again a cluttered market in terms of, do we want to build our own? The complexity of managing your own consent management solution is again a very different thing. And again, if you are going with any tech giant, and even we don't have a license providers at this point of time, I think even the DPDP board has not issued licensing to the consent managers. So this entire complexity of the legal framework, the framework around the consent management, the technology itself, I think we have every insurer has taken the journey. They have started identifying, they have done the gap assessment, applicability assessment. But I think the proof of the pudding of biting the bullet, I think that is still on a slow pace.
Thank you, Satyanandan. Before coming to you, Samuel, I have a question for three of you, Satyanandan, Anita, and Shivani. How do you see this? You are a data fiduciary and you will have multiple data processors, your vendors are working on your data. How do you see the equilibrium? Second question is, how do you think it will impact SMBs, small and medium businesses, startups? You want to take? Yeah, please.
That's a little tricky, right? In DPDPA, if you actually see, as a data fiduciary, startups can be exempted. That's what is mentioned, that it is possible that...
as a SDF, but as a data processor, you still can pass them the contractual obligation. But how do you see they taking it up?
Yeah, exactly. So if as a data fiduciary, if they are not prepared as a startup, as a data, the entire responsibility falls to the data fiduciary to run everything through your contractual obligations with the startup ecosystem. So I think there is no single answer for it. So usually, I mean, if you ask, should we not consider the startups and onboard them as vendors? The answer is definitely, you should not look at excluding them. No, you should onboard, because that's where the innovative technology comes from. But what is the risk appetite? Can you take the risk appetite that you can drive certain things with the contractual clauses? But risk appetite is something that will be calculated and will be absorbed by the organization. So there's no answer unless, you have to go through each of the contractual clauses with them about, how will they, if they are collecting data directly from the data principals, Is there a consent mechanism? Are they going with some privacy by design? Is there a concept in the application? That is something that they have to check. If it is an analytics company or if it is an AI company, again, you'll have to do the due diligence with respect to the AI models, right? You'll have to check where is, how is the data being collected? Is there a synthetic data, or is there any risk with respect to the data that is used by the AI models? If it is analytics, again, it's the same thing. Are you able to give, again, as a data fiduciary, you can decide what is the kind of data that you want to share with the analytics company. So it depends on what kind of SMEs that you're dealing with, and according to that, the solutions will vary.
Thank you, Anita. Shivangi.
Sure, I think it all depends on the risk appetite, like Anita has mentioned. Obviously, we will have to do the impact assessment, data impact assessment within the group and see what exactly do you want to outsource, be it an SME or any other company, right? Whether it's a startup or...
Now, how are SMEs reciprocating? You must be discussing with vendors.
Right.
What is their view when you're saying that these will be the contractual obligations?
There's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of pushback because I think when it comes to small businesses, they would not have like a perfect security posture, right? And then when we start to demand those from them based on whatever contractual obligations we are putting in that agreement, I think they will have to do a lot of investment at their side. Are they even ready to do those investments for, getting connected with bigger companies? So I think that's the game changer, right? That's what I was talking about in the previous conversation as well, that if we start looking at this positively, I think even these smaller companies, we will get to see their security posture being improved. The trust, the regulatory risk and all of it will start to get addressed. I mean, somewhere we have to start doing all these things. It's not like we haven't been doing it. Maybe on a smaller scale, we've done it from other regulatory requirements perspective, of course. This is just one more add-on to the whole gamut. So yes, to answer your question, there is a lot of pushback on can we reword or can we do something like this, etc., etc. But then how much can you delve or reduce or manipulate the words within the agreement? It all depends on us, right? How we want to sign up. And that comes only when you do a proper risk assessment on what you are outsourcing where.
Thank you.
Prasad, you have service providers, they come with a price point for the service. The price point could be, I would say, a 2,000 for a service transaction. When you have these regulatory obligations with regards to the DPDP, and when you are a significant data fiduciary, and we are passing on the obligations to the contractual requirements, the price point will become 20,000. No service provider is going to invest on the type of requirements what you have, because the scale and wherewithal of that service provider, I could talk about the Indian insurance industry in particularly, they do not have that amount of capital with them to get those investments in place. We work with multiple service providers. We have a third-party outsourcing arrangements, a program, a framework in place. Over the period of years, we have also seen that the amount of maturity these service providers have around their infrastructure and amount of investment they have as per their capital projects, capital deployment they do in these type of activities. And when you come with the regulatory obligations, which definitely is not, insisted by you as an client, but because you are passing on that regulatory obligation to them, because it is an ecosystem, you are a body corporate in the government, in the country itself. And as a body corporate, you need to have those controls in place. So I'm seeing that this price point will change from 2,000 to 20,000 because that's the only way. So and because the liability falls on the significant data fiduciary for not ensuring that the service provider has the right controls in place. And if the data breach happens and the data leak happens at their service provider and you didn't do the due diligence, you will not get into that that space. You will definitely say that, okay, these are the contractual obligations. You need to do this. I will have a quarterly audit or I will have an annual recertification process. You need to give me a confirmation. And then the price point will change. So this is also one of the representation what we have made to the regulator, because as I told, the insurance industry, the design, the ecosystem works that we work with intermediaries. We are a backend. Insurance business itself is a backend business. We are not a front-end business. So when you have that design in place, then automatically the cost of service, the cost of, tomorrow, all this goes into my premium also. If my service proposition increase, the what premium I charge to my policyholders may also get impacted because my cost of business will increase. So this has to be solved for. This is going to come. And this is also some of the representation we ought to have made to the regulator that if at all, it should not be left to the insurers to put on the obligation to the intermediaries because there are a lot of intermediaries which are licensed entities from IRDA, from the regulator. If regulator is putting that obligation through the regulatory licensing process, then my price point will not change.
Thank you for that elaborate answer. Aniket, I will extend this question to you. When you talked about how your intent of processing the data has to be conveyed from the merchants, especially dealing with small merchants, I'm not talking about large like Zomato or Flipkart or Amazon, dealing with small merchants, what is your experience?
So it's a mixed experience. Like ma'am mentioned out here, there is always a pushback on accepting certain clauses. If you cannot expect a 10-person company to have those exquisite security controls and certifications and all in place. They might not be that mature. They might be getting there, but not be that mature. However, you have to always look at the positive sides of such things. So if these are small players, what you could actually do is bundle your service in such a way that it can help your business case. So in the payment ecosystem, we spoke about not having an avenue for taking consent from your merchants or from your customers directly. If it's a smaller player, if it's a smaller, it's a startup, it's a small merchant who is basically integrating with you in your ecosystem, you can give them that add-on service so that it helps them in their transaction processing as well as it helps you in collecting the consents on their behalf.
You're doing that, and how are you doing that?
One way is to give them a checkout page. So if they do not want to have their own add to cart or their own checkout page, you can give them you can give them a customized checkout page of the intermediary. You have your branding in place and you have a checkboxes or your OTPs or your consent mechanisms built in those checkout pages, which also allow you to take consent on behalf of the merchant as well as for you as an intermediary. So that's the positive that we can look at from a smaller company. But security always becomes a challenge. Ma'am mentioned about managing DSAR, data subject rights, for those smaller players and their customers, because they also pass on the data to you. Right. And maintaining audit trails, because your regulator mandates you to have audit trails of all your partners as well. So those things become challenging. So it's a mixed bag. I think from a DPDPA, we can try to monetize it or focus on the positives and consider it as an additional avenue for consent rather than just ignoring that sort of business and focusing on the negatives. That's what we can look
Interesting, that solution, that providing a checkout page. Correct. And that's where you getting your consent as well. Well, this is a lot more about procedural compliance. Now let's look at how technology will help solve some of these problems, if not all. And Samuel, could you throw light on this?
Thanks, Prasad. And thanks for all the insights of the challenges from all the panelists.
We lost you in between.
When we talk to many of our customers in the region, there's a similar challenges has been expressed. Predominantly, what does technology want you to solve for you? A is the visibility, and B is the control to manage, right? The challenges what all of this articulated here is basically it comes with A, the size and scale of the data, B, the complexity of the data in terms of where it is located, where it could be in the RDBMS in-house, in the on-premises. It could be in multi-cloud. It could be in Amazon S3. So it could be various. The complexity is in terms of location, and complexity is also in terms of reading those data, right? And the types of data, right? So what are the technologies today is giving you that automated process to first is discover where these personal data or the sensitive data is located, then classify those, because you've got to classify that what's those and label it accordingly so that the automation helps you, whether you're complying to GDPR or DPDP Act in India, So what are those which is there to classify? And then finally, after you discover, classify, and then manage. When it comes to managing that, so it gives a lot of the DPDP Act, provides a lot of power to the data principal or the data subject is concerned. So maybe they can offer opt out of managing that consent, they can edit their one, they can correct it and all those things. How do you manage this data, right? And how do you automate this process is what is all the technology which is trying to bring to the table, an automate process. In a template and easier form for the data privacy practitioners and the teams makes it easy to understand that, okay, what are the risk factors which is there. How do you identify that? How do you parse the data which is needed? Now we are talking of the complexities associated with not the data fiduciary who's owning the data which is there, which is you're now subcontracting to a lot of data processor which is there. There's a channel which goes through that. How do you ensure that? These are the complexities which comes with it, and the technologies what is trying to get you is in a as simplified manner as to give you the visibility and control to manage those data and comply to that and integrate with the data security aspect of it so that where you know that for sure data breach could be a possibility, but data exfiltration is unacceptable, right? So that's where your positioning and data posture which you need to manage on. This is where the technology where we are trying to help our customers to meet the requirements from a regulatory perspective as well as what is needed to be done, because tomorrow it's what I'm going to see that it is not just B2C, B2B. Almost every organization tomorrow, it's going to be all encompassing, which you need to manage the personal data.
Thank you so much, Samuel. With this, I will open the questions for audience. Aniruddha, can you pass the mic? Mic, please.
Hello. My name is Niranjan. I'm from ID5. My question is regarding the conflicts that are present in the mandates of DPDP and the mandates made by regulatory bodies such as SEBI, IRDA, and RBI. For example, for a savings bank account to suffice, you will need a proof of identity, proof of address, and a PAN to open a savings bank account. But a revocation of that consent for any of these three taken together or individually will lead to closure of this product or service. Any product where the consent leads to, revocation of the consent leads to closure of that particular product or service, forces the data fiduciary for implicit consent collection or mandatory consent collection, which is against what DPDP says, where it says consent has to be free, specific, unambiguous. So how do we solve the conflicts that are present between the regulatory bodies and the mandates made by DPDP?
I'll take it up. So it's a classic catch situation, right? That your customer might want to, and any company, if you look at it, because of the advent of GDPR or the upcoming DPDP Act, you will have a flurry of messages coming to your customer support teams: delete my data, delete my information, I want to revoke my consent. And this is happening today as well. The way to look at it is, see, you're still asking for an explicit consent when you are onboarding a client, a customer, or a merchant, whatever you want to call it, a data principal. When you're onboarding a data principal in an ecosystem, you obviously give them the consent. However, you ensure that your privacy policies, your notices are clear enough to state that the option of withdrawal is there, but with the fact that we will not be able to service you further, and the fact that we might be retaining your information for regulatory purposes. There's a difference between retention of information and stopping processing of information. If the request is coming as please delete my data, we might not be able to do this because your regulations mandate you to do that, right? Your regulations mandate a 7-year, a 9-year, a 10-year period based on which regulator you're privy to. However, the Act mandates you to stop processing that information from any further activities. So you can keep records of those because of your regulator mandates, but stop processing it. So no more marketing, no more cross-selling, no more reaching out to the customer again. You can also take it one step ahead. If there's an active service in place as a part of this request, you give them that information that let's say you're an insurance player like sir mentioned, and you have an active insurance policy. you cannot service the customer if he raises his request. Then it's your call whether you want to completely nullify the policy, stop its benefits, and intimate the customer accordingly, or convince him to stay till the period your policy period is completed. Post that, you can revoke the consent for further processing, but your retention remains as per so and so regulations. That's the only midway to look at how to retain the data, keep it for your audits and logs and regulatory purposes, as well as ensure that the customer doesn't feel dissatisfied.
I would like to add to Aniket's point. Of course, transparency is there where you give the information about this. But there is also one more point in DPDPA. If the service is requested by the data principal, and if the data is voluntarily given, it is exempted. So you maybe, there are some transactions where you can base on that. And in other cases, of course, consent and give a transparency privacy notice which clearly indicates, as he mentioned, that the service will be withdrawn if you withdraw your consent.
Hello, jury. So my question is, what are your expectations to the payment and settlement schemes? Because technically, to connect two entities, there are payment and settlement schemes in India, which act as a central body to for complete ecosystem. So what rules, after coming DPDP into picture, that payment and settlement schemes need to play for complete ecosystem?
So I'm a payment guy, so let me take this again. See, there's no clear answer right now, right? Like everybody's waiting for the rules, we are also waiting for rules, right? Everybody's waiting, some clarity will be given. Payment ecosystem, there are multiple. There's an acquirer entity, there's an issuing entity, there's a bank, there's a merchant, there's the likes of Visas and MasterCards, you have BBPS, which is your bar bill pay system, your NPCIs of the world. Multiple ecosystems. It's a very complicated ecosystem, right? You can solve certain problems with agreements and contractual clauses. However, it's an evolving system. So if you are asking for a clear-cut answer right now, I don't think anybody would have that. You go to any lawyer, every lawyer will give you a different set of opinions, because the rules might give some more clarity based on which every individual entity will work out their own caveats, and that's how agreements will be put in place, and that's how the ecosystem will get upgraded. So that's the only thing that I can tell you right now in the current state of affairs.
But if they are defining their own purpose, it means they become data fiduciary. Otherwise,
that is definitely the case.
And that's why they might come as independent data fiduciary. Any other questions? I think there are a few hands there. We can take two more questions and then we have to close. We're running out of time.
Good afternoon, everyone. My question is with respect to the consent aspect. Because why can't we depend upon, because for banking and the insurance sectors, why can't we depend upon the legitimate use instead of going for the basic things should be dependent on the consent aspect? Because under legitimate use, as Anita has clearly mentioned, that one is the voluntary disclosure. Another aspect is the following up with the existing laws. And IRDF, through RBI or IRDF, through these regulatory bodies, we can depend upon the legitimate use for our basic products. We can leave behind the marketing aspect, cross-selling, other things. But how long can we depend upon the legitimate use to process the customer data instead of going for everything we can go for the consent aspect?
Only in certain cases, lawful basis is possible, which is clearly indicated in DPDPA. But in DPDPA scenario, even for banking context, there are multiple scenarios where you'll have to seek consent. There is no other option. So, like for example, your KYC also, you will have to seek consent and you'll have to give the transparency notice.
So actually, let me add to that. So we had this earlier version, the concept called deemed consent, which got dropped, and consent become major instrument, and GDPR, etc. There is legitimate purpose, etc. Valid contract, performance of the contract. Now, unfortunately, now consent has become a major instrument. Obviously, when you say consent, then the various features of consent, free, specific, unambiguous, become part of that compliance. Withdrawal of consent again becomes part of it. So obviously, it's a kind of become a mandate.
As sorry, to add to that. As I mentioned earlier also, right, that clause, we'll have to check in which cases we can use where customer has come asking for a request and voluntarily giving data.
That voluntary disclosure is different.
Different. But in banking case, right, you will have to ask a lot of data. It is your a bank's requirement to collect a lot of data as part of the application processing. So these are some things where you cannot avoid consent as per DPDPA.
So we will have a tomorrow detailed discussion on consent manager. We have a specific session for that.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
This side, Prasad. One final question from, I don't know how much time we have. So from a consumer perspective, once this is implemented, DPDP Act, can a consumer expect that there won't be any calls from, say, any bank, Mr. So-and-so, we have a free annual card for you, credit card or an insurance policy. Do we get rid of this kind of calls?
I think that's a problem everybody is facing, right?
You should get actually.
You should be.
Unless you have given consent to use your data for marketing purpose to
I think, yeah, what changes from earlier to now is that there is a law to sue. Rest all might remain the same. So, but there will be implementation, there will be more stringency from the institutions to work with each of the service providers with respect to contracts, but the retrospective reach might not be 100% in having a control. So if these cases are there, you can see a decrease definitely, but maybe not 100%. But if it is still existing, I think the awareness that there is a law existing will bring down these cases. That's all. But from institutions' perspective, all attempts will be made.
I think we'll have to go with the last question, I think.
Sorry, before that, I'll give an alternate opinion here. See, you look at, you're looking from a consumer's point of view that you don't want banking calls. You're taking every effort to ensure that your XYZs of the world, be it a card provider, be it a bank or an insurance company, does not call you. You will try to block their numbers and they, you will take every effort. But you also have to understand that companies are taking equal amount of efforts to find smarter ways of taking your consent and making calls to you. And a classic example of that, even before the DPDP Act, is you must have seen in the last 1-2 years, every company has started sending WhatsApp messages to you. How many of you do you even recollect opting in for the WhatsApp tick? But there have been smarter ways in which companies have taken those consents. So whilst the frequency will definitely reduce because of stringent regulations and these requirements, but there will always be companies thinking 2 steps ahead to ensure that take your express consent and reach out to you. So just be aware of that as well.
On that, there will be something called specific consent, bundled consent. I think we can cover it tomorrow. I think there is alarm. Last question, and then we.
So I think you guys spoke about the challenges in terms of having, alliances, partners, do the contractual bit. So I think 2 questions. One is, how are you enforcing them, the contractual requirements on your partners, vendors? And second question specifically to Satya, the amount of data which you guys have as an insurance company, be it the consumer data, the broker data, the agent data, how are you, while you're representing, and putting a representation forward to IRDA in terms of how to, draft the norms and the specific regulations, any processes, techniques, technologies that you guys are, adopting right now to ensure that you kind of maybe at step 0 before the actual regulations come out?
I will take the first part of the question and pass it on to you with respect to insurance. With respect to business alliance partners, banking also has got a lot of alliance partners. So, this is a different relationship where the risk is a little more higher than the standard B2B relationships like, fund houses or exchanges that we talked about. So the risk level, we have a risk rating and there is a due diligence that is performed. There is no technology, there are technologies available, but it all depends on the investment. So in certain pockets, we will get investments to a certain extent. But where, if there is an investment for using smart contracts, using blockchain technology, in specific high-risk areas, these are used. But otherwise, it's not used. So with alliance partners, if there are sensitive data, and if there is, depending on what you spoke about, the volumes of data, the kind of sensitivity involved, and the risk rating is arrived during the due diligence. And based on that, rest of the aspects, technology investments will fall in place. That's how we are operating. I'll pass it on with respect to insurance piece.
I think in insurance also, I think we are evolving the type, when you talk about the implementation and the technology solutions, I think we are also in the evaluation phase. I think majorly the contractual obligations and the overall the design of the framework is under question. So we are making representations. At this point of time, we are doing an applicability assessment of where the data lies and where the data needs to be protected and what type of solutions are there available in the market. So I would say this is a slow pace. I have not seen any insurance company which has gone into the implementation because still the DPDP rules are not out. And this has to be evaluated because there is a lot of implication on this industry because of the type of the design of this business itself. And the intermediaries hold the primary copy of the data. When you have the primary of the copy of the data not with the entity itself, then it becomes a very complex subject.
Thank you so much, Satyanandan. I think you can take it after this session. You can talk to them. They're going to be around. You can talk to them over lunch as well. I will thank you so much. Thank you so much for your patience as well. As a token of gratitude, we would like to present a small gift to you.